All right, you know what? After the buttering up, I'm going to go completely the opposite direction right away. I'm going to ambush you. I love the
Okay.
podcast. I hated your take about hits in the NFL that are being flagged right now on the latest episode. You seem to be kind of one of the, actually, I won't say you're the only person because we had Jeff Schwartz on last week and he seems to be very calm about this as well. I, I'm not freaking out completely because we haven't seen it in a regular season game yet. And I think that this is the time where you try to get the kinks out. You use it as a trial period. You go extra cautious in the preseason so that you have tape and you can give it to officials and say, hey, look, this is why this isn't a penalty or why this is a penalty. But I got to say, the concept of the rule, and again, you alluded to it on the podcast about leading with the helmet, and I just don't know how you can properly police that in a game. Like you look at the tweet Richard Sherman put out, I think it was yesterday, just about how and a lot of times this is really impossible. And some of these hits that we've seen in the preseason are not at all dangerous. Like I'm worried that this is a direction that's going to not only just push fans away, but one that I don't think is doing anything to really improve the safety of players.
Yeah, you've kind of made the argument for me in that I think the preseason is one thing, and I want to see how it's officiated during the regular season, which is often very different. I've also watched these games, and people are going crazy on social media as if they've watched all these games, and I just can tell that they haven't because it's like one of these calls in every other game, and you could come up with pass interference calls, one of those calls in every other game that's very questionable. They're not going to get it completely right. And even this entire season, you're right. It might be, there might be some painful moments, some growing pains with this rule, but I just get the feeling on social media that everyone complaining about the rule week after week are the same people that were absolutely killing the NFL for not keeping the players safe. And it just kind of makes me wonder, like, what are you really concerned with here? Are you concerned with player safety or are you not? Because I think there are going to be some tough moments with this rule this year.
So I'm like, we're not going to debate whether or not there's an outrage culture built into social media. I think that that's pretty clear.
Right.
I will say this though, that's my biggest problem with the rule is not so much that there has been this massive accumulation or this is so far looked like it's going to be a real problem. It's that to me this feels more like lip service than actually creating something that fosters safety for players. Like I don't look at this rule and think to myself, wow, football is so much safer now. Wow, there's going to be so many fewer concussions. Like we're already moving in this direction. We already have, I think, increased the like what it means to be a personal foul penalty. I think we're protecting the quarterback better than we ever have. I look at this and say, yeah, this is just lip service for an outrage culture, and now you're just creating another one. Like this isn't really doing anything. Like, don't you feel that way?
Well, I don't. I do think this is a seismic change. So in one way, I totally understand all the players and ex-players who are upset and are saying that the sport has changed because I kind of can see it. It is a sea change. To stop lowering your helmet and the change that that's going to have, I think not just in the NFL, but in college and in high school. And so many of these rules in terms of tackling and hits to the helmet have been implemented throughout football in America and I think worldwide that plays football, like in Canada. And I think this is going to be one of the bigger changes. They're trying to reteach players that are growing up. It's not so much the pro players now who are going to have to adjust how they play, but a lot of players that haven't even gotten to the NFL that are basically going to have to teach how to tackle with their head up. I mean, that's kind of the number one thing. And I think the Ryan Shazier injury a year ago was a big factor in why this finally got through.
I'm not surprised that people are outraged just because in general people hate change. And it could be the smallest thing to your daily routine. Honestly, if you go to the same place to get coffee all the time and they stop making the type of pastry that you like, you're going to be outraged. You might rant about it on Twitter. If you're really upset, you might send a strongly worded email to head office. People hate change, but they get used to it. I'm wondering from your standpoint, do you think for the officials there was a mandate? Listen, when you're calling this in the preseason, better safe than sorry. Have these players really thinking about it headed into the regular season, and then, like most rules, when they get acclimated to it, it stops becoming such a factor, or we're not really calling it as tight because, as you mentioned, the aforementioned training and watching game film after the preseason is completed.
I think that's exactly right, that they are calling a little extra in the preseason. We've seen them do that with previous rules. It's also a way for the NFL league office and the officials to kind of coach up the officials, because they're putting the officials in a tough spot. And so I think they're erring on the side of calling things in the preseason almost as teaching mechanisms. Just like for players, I think players have preseason games where they're trying to do things that they necessarily wouldn't do in the regular season. They're trying out different techniques. And I think that it's a learning process for the officials. It doesn't mean it's going to be perfect in the regular season. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of calls that make a lot of people angry. But I'm more staying calm because I want to see what happens in the regular season before I go too crazy.